Hey, it's Mark, your firefighter, realtor, and out-of-state investor. Today, I have an amazing guest on, Dan from Resilient REI. He has a top 50 real estate investing podcast. He's an investor, he's a social media content creator, and I'm going to introduce Dan right now. Thanks for joining me, Dan.
Mark, thank you so much for inviting me. And before we hit record, we were talking about how we're both Bears fans, and I don't know how you got so lucky to be a Bears fan in Hawaii, and I'm stuck out here in cold Chicago. It's an honor to be here and to be speaking with you.
Well, I think you just probably took away all my viewers now for bringing up that we're Bears fans, and I don't know who's going to follow us after this, but yeah, we're both Bears fans, diehard Bears fan, and somehow we just got connected, and we just figured that he's in Chicago and I'm a Bears fan, and we kind of just connected that way. But Dan, why don't you give us a little bit of your backstory?
Sure. So my name is Dan. I run the Resilient Real Estate Investing podcast, and my focus is on real estate. I love real estate. So personally, I own a couple rental properties in Milwaukee. Like I mentioned before, I live in Chicago. So it is technically out of state investing, even though it's only a 90-minute drive, which is a lot different than you and your portfolio, right? You can't go from Hawaii to Pittsburgh in 90 minutes. But I've been doing it for I like to say about 6 years now. The first three were all me learning about real estate and also learning how to put myself in a position to invest in real estate. I had to learn how to, become better at sales. That's my profession. I'm in sales. I had to learn how to save some money. I had to learn how to buy real estate. What's a deal? What isn't a deal? And then 3 years ago, I was able to buy my first deal. And to date, we've got four and working on closing on a house hack that will close in a couple months. And so, probably about October or so, I will have five rental units and we'll be house hacking. So that's kind of like where I currently am at real estate wise.
Awesome. I mean, that's some great information right there. I love how you right from off the get-go, you're talking about how you love real estate. So kind of let's talk about that a little bit. Like what, I guess, kind of were you all from a young age, were you always into real estate, or how did that start for you?
I don't think so. I didn't really discover real estate until basically my entire professional world collapsed, and I'm sure that we could get into that story. But as a kid, I was very entrepreneurial. I was going out and I was mowing lawns. I took the family minivan, and that became like my lawnmower, truck, like my work truck, and just absolutely destroyed that 1999 mint green Honda Odyssey, which I thought then, and I think now, is still one of the ugliest cars on the road. I'm not a big minivan fan, but I would go and I would mow lawns, and I really enjoyed kind of working for myself and building that up. And then when I was in college, I was like, I'm going to do a startup, and I did a startup that went nowhere, that fizzled out almost immediately. And then I started a podcast where I ran around the city of Chicago interviewing people who were, starting companies, entrepreneurs, people who are founders, some a little bit more polished and professional than others. But I didn't know any better, and it was a lot of fun. But I think that with those conversations is kind of where the seeds of real estate started to get planted, because I started meeting with people who were starting companies, but also people who were investing in companies. And a lot of them owned real estate. There's been a couple who are family friends who talked about how they own rental properties, and it just kind of, I guess I thought that was very appealing to me, like that lifestyle of being an investor, and it was very exciting, but I didn't really understand how to go out and actually do it, right? Like, how do you have the money to buy a house to begin with, to live in? Nonetheless, how do you go out and have enough money to buy a house that you're not going to live in? So that took me a little bit of time to kind of understand. But then once I really started doing some digging, like I said, after my world kind of fell apart, real estate just stood out to me. It made a lot of sense. The fact that I can get cash flow and I can have somebody else pay down a debt was just like, this is amazing. Like, why am I not just working all day, every day on getting this done as much as possible?
I have so much questions now that you brought it. So that before we kind of dig into maybe your first property, let's kind of go back about what you're mentioning, how your world crumbled or came crashing down. Let's kind of dig into that a little bit.
Sure. So in college, I had a podcast, like I mentioned, and I was running around, and I started it my junior year. I had no idea what I was doing and I had no money. So I started using it to see if I couldn't get some sponsorship just so I could have some drinking money, right? Some drinking money in college, like any college kid would want. I got some sponsors and it was going pretty well, but I thought that it wasn't going to be enough where I could live off of it after I graduated. So the goal shifted. The goal shifted from trying to make money doing it to how can I put myself in a position to get the best job possible after I graduated? And one thing led to another, one interview led to another interview, and I landed at a company, a medical technology company. I'm not going to say the name, and you'll probably figure out why in a couple minutes. But I was in as like an early entry level salesperson. So my whole role was like the entry level, the sale, trying to get somebody to take a meeting with my senior account executive, Devin, who was like this guy who was making just crazy money. Really looked up to him. And, he was probably 30, 35 or so, but I was 23. So he was like the old man, the old seasoned real estate, or sales guy, I should say. And I came in and started crushing it. And just to kind of paint you a picture of this company, it had all the momentum in the world. They had raised over $550 million like the summer before I joined. Everybody was buzzing. It was a who's who of who invested in this company. I mean, Google, Pritzker, the Pritzker Ventures, and JB Pritzker, who that's kind of where all the money comes from, is now the current governor of Illinois, as well as High Park Ventures. Like all the big venture funds had poured into this company, and I was like, this is great. We've got 3 baristas on staff. We've got free lunches. We've got a kegerator. So we've got free beer. Like this is what more than, and we're in an amazing office building in the city of Chicago. Beautiful views of the river and of the lake. And what ended up happening was one day is I was doing my computer, doing my work. And then I looked up, and where I was at, I was kind of at like the edge of where all the sales guys were. Like I was almost in a different department. Just kind of how the layout was. And I looked in front of me and half the chairs were empty. And I looked over to Devin and he had his head in his hands. I was like, Devin, what's going on here? Did we miss a meeting? And I'm looking at my calendar and he said, no, Dan, they all got laid off. And I didn't really understand it because everything was going great, right? Like the wind was at our back. We were being told how successful the company was. And I didn't understand it. And so I made a really just awful joke now looking back on it. And I said, good, we deserve some time off. We're working so hard. And he's like, no, Dan, they got laid off. Like, this is serious. So that started a couple month just downward spiral of the company. And it was really kind of amazing to see, and not amazing in a great way, it's just amazing in a horrible way. Because it was a startup that had a lot of people that were just drinking the Kool-Aid, who just thought that the company could do no wrong. The executives were the best, they were like gods. And we had these things called town halls that were every Thursday, and the entire company would go up and the CEOs would kind of like strut about and just really talk, but not really talk about anything. Talking about how they were meeting with politicians and how the company was expanding into New York and we were going to go into Europe, but it was nothing like actual. There's no real substance looking back on it. But you had a lot of people who were just, sucked into it. And over those months, you started seeing people being like, hey, maybe this isn't fake news. Maybe we did steal a bunch of money. And apologies, there's a fire truck here. Kind of good timing on them. But it was just wild to see, and it was just wild to experience, and just seeing how people who thought that they had all the job security in the world, who are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and all of a sudden they didn't. They had to go find another sales job where they could make that same type of money because they had this lifestyle. They had their families, were accustomed to this lifestyle. They had these mortgages, these cars that they all had to pay for. So they had to go out and find a job, while they had the stain of working for a company that was fraudulent, and one of the biggest fraudulent companies in Chicago startup history.
Wow, that's a lot to take in right there. I mean, what I'm kind of picking up though is like no job is secure, and I know my story a little bit. I did a newsletter for you and stuff, but I'm in the fire service, and it's pretty secure. But that's where my mindset all shifted was, I have this pension, I have this job, but during the lockdowns, I saw people getting laid off and losing their jobs, and that totally made my mindset change about my financial future and what I was doing and how risky I was being. So after all of this happened for you, so did you have any properties during this time, or was it all your properties obtained after all of this happened?
I had no properties at this point in time. I really view this as kind of like the day zero of when real estate really started for me, because that's when I started researching it. That's when I started realizing like, hey, I knew in college when I did the podcast that the startup life maybe necessarily wasn't for me. Just seeing how hard people were running, and it really, I felt like a lot of people were just kind of running on a treadmill, running to get that next round of funding, running to try and get that next dollar. And it just seemed like people were getting burnt out. It just wasn't very appealing to me. And then I thought the corporate route, that's where I would get the job security. That's where, I'd be able to make my money. And going through that experience so early in my professional career, that's when I was just like, there's got to be a different way. And then I just kept on thinking back to all those investors I was meeting with. And again, they were investing in startups, but they also had significant holdings in real estate. So that's when I started like researching, like, how does this whole real estate thing work? Like, how can I get one of those?
So you must be also a big believer in like networking, because it sounds like you're saying you had your podcast and all these people that you were meeting had some sort of hand in real estate, and just the people that are around you were doing this, and it just kind of put you down that path to maybe pick their brains or just get more information about real estate. So let's kind of touch on maybe your first purchase. Was that a primary residence, or it was already a rental, your first purchase?
The first purchase was a primary, and it was a studio condo. I ended up losing $20,000 on it because I was stupid. Because only there's a very few select group of people who are dumb enough to buy a studio condo, a luxury studio condo. I initially went into it with good intentions. I wanted to house hack. I wanted to get a 2-bedroom, 1 bath, 2-bedroom, 2 bath, if I could really find it, and then get a roommate and then help have that split the mortgage. I didn't know it was house hacking at the time. I just thought like that made sense. But I was going up against having a entry level salary in a very expensive city without a car, right? So I was looking in just really unsavory areas to be able to qualify to get a 2-bedroom. And so I did that for a couple months, just looking. None of it. It's like, I could afford this, but I would have to put so much money into it that it just wouldn't make sense. And then my agent just shared this listing with me of this beautiful view of this studio. He was probably just like, hey, let's move this guy along. Let's get him to buy something. And I saw it and I'm like, that's the thing. That's what I want. So it's a 450, 500 square foot studio on the corner of Lakeshore Drive and Addison, if anybody who's familiar with the city. So the beautiful view of Belmont Harbor. I was on the 26th floor. And it was great. It was amazing. And then COVID hit eventually, and I got married, and the building was a little bit old. And the thing that they don't tell you about high rises, especially older high rises, is that they creak. And this was probably right around the time when the building in Surfside in Florida collapsed. And I'd wake up at night because of creaking, because just natural creaking of an older building. And I told my wife, I'm like, we got to get out of here. We got to get out of here. So we eventually sold it. I bought rental properties before I sold it. But that's my first deal. I ended up selling it for basically what I paid for it. But if you factor in all those monthly mortgage payments were going towards interest, they weren't going to principal, because I only held it for 3 years. I think 3 years. So the appreciation hadn't like helped me out. Plus all the cost of selling it, getting it ready, doing painting. Plus a couple of years previously, I had refinanced because I was able to get a better loan, and that was a couple grand. So if in total, I probably lost about 20 grand on that property. And a lot of people are like, oh, you should have just held it. You should have just held it. You should have just rented it out. And believe me, I looked into it. I tried to rent it out, but it would have at the top of the market, it would have broken even. If there's any repairs, any vacancies, I would have been in the hole. And also, it would just have thrown off my debt to income ratio, right? Because it was about $140,000. So whatever it was, like $120,000 in debt that was going against my name when I was trying to buy more rental properties. It just made more sense just to kind of cut my losses and move on.
Yeah, that's actually a smart move, I think. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure you looked at all avenues on this. I mean, you seem very educated on this subject. So I'm sure you took everything into account. And, it's 20,000 sounds like a lot, but probably in the long run, like you're saying, it probably worked out best for you. And you could deploy that capital other places. And even like you're saying, it doesn't affect your debt to income ratio. And that's, especially in Hawaii, that's one of the big problems that I come across is, the property values are so high that my debt to income was already high when I was trying to get into investment properties. And that's kind of what led me down the path of the debt service coverage ratio loans and the asset based loans. But, let's kind of touch up on your subject as far as that first investment property, I guess you purchased out of state. How did that go for you?
Yeah, so it's kind of a funny story how I picked Milwaukee. Like I said, I was studying real estate for 3 years, and I knew that Chicago was just too expensive. We always talk about how the Midwest is such a cash flow market, and you can buy properties for so cheap. Not in Chicago, not in Cook County, like not in the immediate area. So I knew I had to go further out just to be able to get things rolling. And probably very early into that journey, I was just hanging out with a friend of mine, and I was like, yeah, I'm thinking about real estate. Like I'm thinking about buying rental properties. And he said, and he's got no experience in real estate, and I don't know if I'd necessarily say that he's like the most financially responsible person in the world, but he said, oh, you should go to Milwaukee. I said, Milwaukee, huh? Why Milwaukee? And he said, oh, you can buy houses for cheap up there. And so this whole process, these whole 3 years, I just had in the back of my mind, Milwaukee, they've got cheap houses. That's just going to be my default market. So when I'm evaluating properties, I'll just plug in, Milwaukee. So I always viewed myself as Milwaukee is where I should be for cheap properties. And then the more I looked into the market, the more it made sense. And then you go back to your network. I've actually we have a family friend who owns rental properties in Milwaukee, who was able to open up some doors on their property manager for me. And that's the property manager we ended up doing some due diligence on and really liked, and who we're working with today. So that's how I landed out in Milwaukee and how I found my property manager, and she's outstanding. She's also our agent. And if you're going to invest out of state, I don't know your process, but having a property manager who's also an agent I found incredibly helpful, because you can have your agent go and walk a property, without you being there, kind of sharing what they view on the deal, and then they can put their property management hat on and say, this is what I think that the tenant base would look like. Here's how viable this property is long term. How hard is it going to be to rent out? So having both sides I found to be very helpful. And I was looking on the MLS. This property came up, early 2020, and it stood out to me. And I'm like, why is this on the market? It's 99,000. It's a 4-bed, 2-bath. It's on a little bit of a busy street, and it looks pretty good. And it's already occupied by a tenant who's paying $1,200 a month in rent. And I had my property management, she went over there and she's like, Dan, this looks like a deal. This was a deal that I would be very comfortable having in my personal portfolio. So I'm like, hey, good enough for you. It's good enough for me. We locked the deal down, didn't have to do any real repairs to it. It was great. That tenant wasn't the best. They always were late, but they always paid. They ended up leaving after the lease was up. We got a new tenant in who's been great. And I looked on Redfin before we hopped on, and it's currently valued at about 130,000. So take it with a grain of salt, but it's been a nice deal. And my approach with this first deal was very simple. I did not want to buy a nightmare. I wanted to buy something that would be as little of a nightmare as possible, because I didn't want my wife, looking at me and saying, dude, why are we spending all this money on real estate? Why aren't we using this money for something else? So that was the goal, and it's been pretty good to us so far.
Yeah, I hear you though when you say take it with a grain of salt. I mean, yeah, Zillow and Redfin estimates definitely always make me feel a little bit better when I go check out my property values in there. But what I'm kind of hearing, and as far as picking a market, it sounds like, and I think that's what stops a lot of people. They get caught up in trying to find this perfect market that hits all these criterias. And it sounds like you kind of did exactly what I did. My friend said, "Hey, Pittsburgh. I invested in Pittsburgh," and I kind of looked into it, researched it, and of course, there's other markets that are probably a lot better. However, he was investing there, and same thing. He kind of caught me with this. Yeah, you can buy cheap houses there, and it sounds like that happened for you. So, would you say that? Did you know a lot about Milwaukee before? I know it's kind of close for you, but did you know a lot about that area before you started investing there?
Not really. Milwaukee and Chicago, they're closer, like I said, in about a 90-minute drive, but I had not spent a whole lot of time in Milwaukee. But what I did do is I spent a lot of time, evaluating the property managers and going up and, meeting with a couple property managers. The one that I'm currently working with, obviously met with her, and I was just really impressed with her professionalism and how good of a businesswoman she is. I think that's what you really want with a property manager. You want someone who's a good business person, because being a property manager, you need to be organized. You need to be able to network, have contractors, have lenders, and a really good property manager, I kind of view as almost like a spider in a web. And they've got like all these rings out there of people who that they can kind of reach out to. And then when you get plugged into that, you're kind of plugged into their web that you can leverage. You can leverage their contractor. If they're not if they're not an agent, they might have an agent on their team, or they might have a preferred agent that they work with. All of a sudden you get clued in with them. If they have any, relationships with lenders, you now have a relationship with that lender. And I think that's really important. I think that so many times people just look at property managers and want to get the cheapest rate possible, whereas there's a lot of value that they can provide that's just not based on their rate.
Totally agree. Yeah, I mean, I have that same mindset where I know a lot of people, they try to, nickel and dime their property manager, say, oh, I want a lower rate, or can we work on our rate? But for me, I rely on my property manager so much, and I don't want to make them feel as if they're not making any money off of me and they're going to do less work for me because I'm trying to cut their rate or cut their fees. So I totally agree with you. And I'm probably going to steal that whole spider web thing. I love that analogy. I love how that reference to that. I mean, that's awesome.
Take it.
So
I haven't trademarked it. Take it.
oh, perfect. All right. Well, so let's kind of go. So how did you scale to your next properties? Did you, is it all conventional financing, or how did you scale your portfolio?
Yeah, so it's all conventional financing. I haven't done anything exotic yet. I mean, the rates at that point were so low. I mean, we're talking about, COVID times back when investor rates were in the threes and the fours. They're not like that anymore, depending on when you're listening to this.
So are yours all under four or pretty?
They're all under 4.5. I think my lowest is like a 3.4 or something, which is just really painful to look at now, because I'm looking at my house hack and I'm trying to mentally prepare that's going to be in the sevens. I'll refinance down the line. The rates will come down. It's like, man, I wish it was back then. I wish the timing was just a little bit different.
Yeah, but the house hack, I mean, that's going to be in Chicago, I'm assuming.
Yeah, so that's going to be in the suburbs, in just a wonderful suburb outside of Chicago.
Yeah, house hacking is amazing. I wish, I could, it's kind of tough in Hawaii to do. I mean, it can be done, but definitely a lot more challenging.
Brandon Turner's doing it. You should link up with him. And I think he's got like an in-law suite or something he rents out.
True. Yes. But still, that's still in the millions, probably probably 1.52. I mean, but yeah, it can be done, but definitely the point of entry is a lot higher. However, but let's get back to Chicago. I kind of want to just pick your brain real quick for this, but
shoot.
My friend is investing. Are you familiar with Gary, Indiana?
Of course I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so is that a market that you looked at possibly? Or I mean, he keeps talking about it.
Oh boy. So Gary, I'm aware of Gary, Indiana, in the way that a lot of Chicagoans are aware of Gary, Indiana as a place that is a little bit dangerous and a little bit risky. And I guess when people hear about Chicago, they view that we're a pretty dangerous city to begin with. So if we're saying an area is a little bit dangerous, maybe that's saying something. But that being said, there are a bunch of investors that I've talked to who are like, "Oh, we need to go. You need to go into Northeast Indiana. You need to no Northwest Indiana, excuse me, which is where Gary, Indiana is located, as a great place for affordable properties right across the state line, easy drive to Chicago." So on paper, it makes sense. I personally haven't really done any evaluation. Although my father, who's lived here his entire life, if I told him that I was going to be investing in Gary, Indiana, I don't know how he would take that. So I'll just that's how I view it.
No, yeah, I know another realtor in Chicago, and I was asking him about Gary, Indiana. He kind of had the same um, description of it, and like he said, I probably wouldn't invest there, but the numbers do make a lot of sense. And you might know him, Millennial Mike, though.
Oh
But
yeah.
yeah, he invests there, and he makes it work. So he has this whole team going on. So as you can see, there's a lot of great markets out there. It's just a matter of what kind of team you have in place.
And I think that that's so important is to have that team. For me, I would much rather have an amazing team over an amazing market or an amazing just general location. Milwaukee is great. Pittsburgh's great. I mean, I would even say that there's probably ways to make Gary, Indiana great. It just comes down to your team on the ground, which is the most important thing when you're an out of state investor, right? You can't be there. You don't want to be there. You're investing out of state for a reason. The people who are actually boots on the ground need to be very good at what they do and people that you can trust. So I think that sometimes people spend way too much time like nitpicking which market they want to be in, and they hem and they haw and they make all these spreadsheets and they spend weeks or months. And it's like, just pick a market and then find the best operators in that market. Like that, I feel like that's a much better use of time. I guess it's a little bit different if you're looking for maybe like an appreciation market, just because that's just a little bit different. But from a cash flow perspective, you need that team to be rock solid.
Exactly. Let's kind of stay on this subject a little bit. As far as if a new investor was going to get started, what would kind of be your main advice that you could give them to help them get started, or what should they be looking for?
Well, they should first subscribe to my podcast and my newsletter, but that's a given. All jokes aside, I think that what they should do is they should understand first and foremost what they want, right? Do you want cash flow? Do you want appreciation? How much money can you realistically spend on an investment property? Is it 50 grand? Is it 20 grand? Is it 100 grand? What are you looking to get out of it, right? Like, are you looking for a place that you can house hack? That's very different than if you're looking for a rental property, within your town or out of state. Right. So like what's kind of your just general objective? So let's take it on to, out of state investing, which, myself and what you do, because that's what we know best. I would then say, okay, well, if you're looking for cash flow, let's pick a city in the Midwest. Do you have any friends, any network, anybody that you have a close relationship with in any city in the Midwest? And if they do, great. Well, let's look into them. Like, do they have any connections to real estate? They do. Perfect. Let's really hone in and let's call and text them all the time now. Let's be their best friend. And let's just say that you don't, right? Like you live in California or Hawaii and you don't have a relationship. Okay. Well, let's pick a market. Let's just pick one that you think is going to grow, do some due diligence, but don't spend months on a market. That market's probably going to be there. And the nice thing about the Midwest is I would venture to say that the Midwest long-term is going to be really good. I don't know if I would say the same thing about Florida for hurricanes, rising prices of insurance. Same thing with Phoenix, right? With the lack of water. I personally, I've got some reservations there. The Midwest has got plenty of water. We have plenty of land and it's pretty affordable. So I would just pick a reasonably large city here in the Midwest. I was going to say, so pick that city and then just try and figure out who is the best property manager. Don't focus on the best agent. Don't focus on the best contractors. Don't focus on the best lenders. Focus on the best property manager. Go into Bigger Pockets. Go on to Twitter. Go. Social media is so helpful for this. Say, hey, who is investing in Memphis? Who's your property manager? People will surprise you and will gladly share who they are working with. They'll share who their property manager is much sooner than they would share who their contractor is. If they've got a rock star contractor, they're not telling you. But if they've got a rock star property manager, they're more likely to tell you. Do that, and then go into that market. Have 4 or 5 meetings set up with property managers, and figure out who is the most professional out of these property managers. Not who's the cheapest. Not who can talk the best game. Who is the most professional, who's got a team in place. And I'll tell you of what this looks like. Going into my property manager's place, she's got this big pegboard, big pegboard wall with all the property. She's got 500 doors that she manages. And each one has got the keys and the label for that key, that door, and the keys to that property. So that's pretty cool. Then she said, hey, want to see something even more interesting? She took us down to the basement, and there were just stacks and stacks of vinyl laminate flooring. There's stacks and stacks of paint. She had a pile of, I think she said like $8,000 worth of smoke detectors. She had a pile of dehumidifiers. And she said, we have the same flooring. We have the same paint for the interior, same paint for the exterior. Basements in Milwaukee, they get humid. We have a dehumidifier. I buy products I see on sale at Home Depot. We got a great deal on smoke detectors, right? So she's looking at it like a business, not looking at, how can I get as many properties as possible and, just charge as little as possible and that sort of stuff. So
I love what you said about property management. Super, super important. But I also know that you're not joking about people following your podcast. I mean, it's Resilient REI. It's amazing. Awesome guests you have on. I love all the content, but definitely, follow him on Twitter. That's how we met kind of, but it's just super information. He is super, super helpful. He's always out there willing to help give information. I kind of also, I kind of want to transition a little bit to your actual podcast now and kind of how that actually got started for you.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been a huge fan of podcasts. I mean, that's how I got my start professionally. And I guess you said something earlier about networking, and I really started this podcast to help me network, just to be with better investors, because being with better investors, it makes me a better investor. And, the more people the more business you can do. So I started the podcast. Technically, I started it as a Twitter account, then added on a newsletter, and then added on a podcast. And so I've steadily been just adding more stuff on my plate, but in kind of a manageable rate. So, and then I'm adding on, Instagram and a little bit more TikTok. I don't have the bandwidth to do YouTube just yet, but that's something that's probably going to be coming in the not too distant future. But I wanted to do it to better understand how to become a better investor. And I've had the amazing luxury of just speaking with some people who are really, really impressive. I mean, yourself as well, right? Like before the show, before I was doing it, I had no idea that there was somebody in Hawaii that was investing in Pittsburgh. I mean, if you would have put a gun to my head, I probably would have said there's probably at least somebody, but I don't know who they are. But now I do. And I know a bunch of other people who do hard money lending, people who are accountants, people who are, house hacking. So I'm doing a house hack right now, and I'm using the show selfishly to better understand how to house hack. It's not all the content on the show, but I'm able to pull people who are really impressive. Like I just did an interview with Jordan Moorhead, who is house hacked for the last 6 years across 5 properties, and just being able to say like, hey, dude, how do I do this? Right? Like, what steps should I be taking for this house hack? What expectations should I have? What systems should I be thinking about? He's a nice guy. Maybe he would have taken that call beforehand. But if I hadn't started Resilient REI, I wouldn't even known that he existed.
So what was the hardest part of starting the podcast? I mean, I know you had a podcast you said a long time ago, but what was the kind of difficulties in getting it actually started?
I think that what people don't understand about podcasting and about what people do on social media, I don't view myself as a content creator. I view myself as somebody who's building a media company, but people say content creator, so we'll just kind of roll with it. Is just the amount of effort and time and due diligence. I was kind of avoiding, I didn't want to get on a treadmill. Like back in my startup days, seeing those people on a treadmill running. I almost feel like that sometimes just because there's so much stuff I have to do. I have to have a newsletter that comes out on Tuesday. I have to have a newsletter coming out on Friday. I have to do a Twitter live on Tuesday night. And then I have to have a podcast version of that coming out on Thursday. And then a whole full length podcast on Monday. So it is kind of like working you are working a lot. And I think that's kind of the hardest part is just having to keep up with that flywheel. But it's worth it because of all the information I've been able to get. And it's really supercharged my own understanding of real estate and my own network for sure. So I think that what people don't understand is, oh, you just have a Twitter account. Well, it's a Twitter account, but there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just sending out mindless tweets, trying to be funny. It's trying to add value, and it's just one leg of a multi-leg chair. That's a really bad analogy, but it kind of works.
You just talked about my Twitter account, though, putting out mindless tweets and trying to be funny.
Hey, but you know what? You're a lot better at it than I am.
No, yeah, Twitter. I mean, I just probably joined maybe 4 or 5 months ago, but yeah, actually, I think that's my favorite platform out of all of them. I mean, just the interaction and just the people I've met. I mean, so far I've enjoyed Twitter quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think that if you're serious about real estate, and let's go back to that newbie who's looking to enter into a market, lives in Hawaii like yourself, and they're looking to invest somewhere in the Midwest, I would create a Twitter account. I really would, and I have it all focused on real estate because there is such a vibrant real estate community on Twitter that is very easy to get into. And just to be able to follow a couple people and just start messaging people or just, doing tweets at somebody like, hey, I understand. Hey, Lauren K. Almond, who hosts the Adulting is Easy podcast and Twitter account. Like, hey, Lauren, you're a short-term rental investor in Florida. What market should I invest in, or what property manager should I work with? Or there's the frugal gay Tom Brickman who invests in Toledo. Hey, Tom, what property manager should I I'm going to Toledo. What property manager should I be looking to have meetings with? Like those people, they've got big accounts, but they're really good people who want to give back. And there's a really good chance that they'll respond to you.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, like you said, that's what I noticed too. Everyone is just so willing to help and, give information. And that's what I love about it. It's not like everybody's trying to have that little secret information or, doing something on their own, but everyone is super helpful. Just like you. I mean, I can reach out to you. I feel, anyone on there, and I can get a good feedback of some information that I'm looking for. But yeah, I love what you're doing. I mean, so, the podcast, like if anybody wanted to get started in that or, media creation, what would you recommend for them to do that or start on how to get started on that?
My approach with the podcast is that I've been doing it for a couple of years. I don't understand the language. I understand a lot about real estate, but I don't view myself as an expert. So I think that I try and come to it with a little bit of humility. And I know that I've spoken so much about kind of like my own experience, but I don't view myself as an expert. I view that there are people who've been doing it for much longer, who have much larger portfolios, who understand real estate much better than me. So my job is to showcase them, to bring them on, pick their brain. I mean, like you're doing with me, and with my show, I hope to bring on people who are really, really smart and know what they're doing. And I think that's what I would tell people to do, right? Don't view yourself as an expert. Go and find experts, because experts love being an expert. They love talking. They love sharing how smart they are. And it gives you the opportunity to ask them whatever you want to ask them for however long they'll put up with you, right? So I would do that, and that's the approach that I would take. And then I would just try and be fun with it. So like with my show, for instance, I don't want to do like the traditional podcast with a guest type format where you bring them on and you talk through their entire life about how preschool was, and then all the way up to what they had for breakfast that morning over the course of like an hour and a half. I like to be a little bit more focused on, this is a strategy that you're doing, why, how, where, what, and and all that. Or this is a story, this is a deep dive, and just to try and have more actionable information. I think that the overall story of the investor and their career is really interesting. I just wanted to be a little bit different. So I think that's the approach that I would suggest for people to take, is just be a little bit different and know that it's going to be a lot of work, but your network is going to explode, and you're going to be, you'll be pretty good for it.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, as you can probably tell, I have a little head cold going on, and I'm trying to push through it. But I know you're so busy, so I didn't want to try to reschedule this
No,
or
good.
anything. So just trying to take advantage of you taking this opportunity to sit down with me and talk. I also I like to ask people that come on my channel, and as far as mindset or just real estate, has there been any like book or even podcast or YouTube channel that you follow that has changed your mindset or helped you build your podcast channel?
There is a book that I read, and it's, calling it a book is a little bit generous. It's really a pamphlet, and I feel like it's become pretty popular over the last couple of years. But it's The Strangest Secret in the World by Earl Nightingale. And if you haven't listened to it, anybody out there, like, you can listen to it for free on YouTube. Like, it's maybe like 20, 25 pages. It's not really a book, but it is outstanding. And the whole premise of what Earl Nightingale is saying is that you become what you think about. So if you want to become successful at real estate, you want to become successful at podcasting, you need to think about that. And you need to think about that all the time. What guests am I going to have? What questions am I going to ask them? Like, continually run through scenarios through your head. So for those 3 years, I was thinking nonstop about how I was going to be a real estate investor, and I was going to be a successful real estate investor. So, I'm going to talk to this property manager. What questions should I be asking them? Or, running through properties, listening to podcasts, reading books, watching YouTube videos, all this stuff, all this content that I was pushing into my brain. And the flip side of that Earl says in his book, and I think it's really poetic, is that if you think about nothing, you become nothing. And there are so many opportunities for us to think about nothing and ultimately become nothing. And I think that kind of also comes down to what you do. Like, if you spend all your time just flipping through social media on TikTok, and really kind of aimless, right? Like, you can do social media, but it has to all be focused in on real estate or how to build a podcast, right? Like, that's a little bit different. But if it's just dog and cat pictures and just silly, goofy stuff, that's really nothing that you're putting in. And so you should expect that you'll get nothing out. So that's my approach. So anything that I want to really focus in on and be successful with, whether it's real estate, whether it's my W-2, whether it's the podcast, it sounds very, very simple, but it's worked for me. Think about nothing but that, and you will become successful at that.
I love it. So let's do a little selfless promotion now. Where can people find you on social media, and give them your podcast name and everything again?
Yeah, and Mark, thank you so much for inviting me on. It's really, really enjoyed spending some time and finally getting to speak with you. This has been a lot of fun. But my podcast is called Resilient Real Estate Investing. I am available everywhere online at Resilient REI. If you are newer to the real estate investing game, REI stands for Real Estate Investing. I've got a newsletter that comes out every single Tuesday where I have pros who come on and write articles about what they're doing in their business. On Fridays, I feature a real estate investor. And then with the podcast, a new episode every single Monday. Like I said, I talk with a real estate investor. We do like a whole kind of their story, or we talk about a strategy that they're doing. We have Twitter lives on Tuesday, and I'm talking about this, and I'm just like, man, I do so much stuff. Like, I don't even, it's just kind of hard for me to comprehend sometimes. But every single Tuesday, I do a Twitter live where we bring on people just to talk about real estate. We take that recording and we put it out there on the podcast for Thursday. And that's about kind of what wraps it up. The easiest place to find me is probably on Twitter at Resilient REI.
I love it. I'm going to put all these links below. Before you go, though, I do have a couple last questions for you. Like we talked about before this interview, what superpower do you think would help you or helps you in this, even podcast, real estate investing? But what superpower do you have?
I don't know if it's a superpower that I have, but I think it's a superpower that I want, and it's speed, like the Flash. I know I'm not a huge superhero guy. I'm much more of a documentary watcher than a superhero watcher when it comes to like movies and stuff. But I think that speed is so important. Speed to getting on that lead, speed to getting the first crack at a property. I think being the first one there and making a good impression is a superpower that I strive to have. I'm not always the quickest, but it's at least something that I strive to be.
I thought you were going to say Spider-Man because you talked about the web and everything before.
Missed opportunity. Oh well.
But actually, so my final question is: will the Chicago Bears trade Justin Fields?
How dare you?
Actually, two questions, maybe. And if not, who should they pick at number one?
Oh, how dare you! How dare you bring up this and end on such a negative note? So for all non-Bears fans and people who are not in Chicago, Justin Fields is the most important person in the city. We're currently going through a mayoral election, and it doesn't matter. Justin Fields is the most important person in the city. They will not trade him. His jersey is the number one selling jersey in Wisconsin, and our rivals, the Green Bay Packers, they've had our number for forever. So that says something. I think that they should trade down and just get as many picks as they possibly can. I know that in kind of retrospect, I'm not doing them the biggest favor because they need people to think that they're going to trade Justin and take another quarterback to make that number one draft pick more valuable. But I don't care. I don't care. We need to keep Justin. We need to keep building around him.
I agree, and we got to turn things around because I'm stuck at the fire station 24 hours a day, and I got a couple Packers fans at my station, and it's painful when football season comes around.
Yeah, they're good.
Yeah, well, I keep teasing them that they have to roll with Jordan Love pretty soon, but yeah, it's been tough these past few years.
For sure. Yeah. I invest in Wisconsin, and I will say that I do like the Packers in general. I just like the Bears more, and I want the Bears just to finally get out of this 20-year rut and just start beating them for a change.
I agree. But Dan, once again, thank you for coming on. Thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule. We'll be in touch on Twitter, and I'm sure I'll see you out there. But everyone else, please like, subscribe, hit the notification button, and just keep looking for those great deals out there. All right, Dan.
Thanks, Mark.